I was holding a paper plate with half-eaten cupcakes when my mother's voice cut through the laughter and clinking of plastic cups. She was standing near the baby gift table, champagne glass in hand, smiling sweetly as she delivered a sentence that punched me in the stomach in front of a room full of family and strangers. "At least this baby has a father," she said, her tone smooth as silk but sharp as glass. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Others went silent. My eyes locked with hers for just a second, and I saw it. The cold satisfaction she always wore when she thought she'd put me in my place. Before I could even react, my Aunt Denise, my mom's sister and her lifelong partner in passive-aggressive warfare, laughed and added, "Unlike her sister's bastard child." Her voice was loud enough to make sure everyone heard it. I froze. The paper plate in my hand bent under the pressure of my grip. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My 9-year-old son, Eli, had been just behind me, excitedly hovering near the punch bowl with the small gift bag he'd picked out himself. He heard every word, and before I could blink, before I could collect myself, he walked past me with that bag in his hand, straight toward my mother. "Grandma," he said, voice steady, small fingers gripping the bag tightly. "I got something for you. Dad told me to give you this." The entire room went dead quiet. Let me back up a little. My name is Zara. I'm 28. I'm a single mom, and I've been raising my son Eli on my own since he was a baby. His father, Jordan, died just a year after Eli was born. Complications from a heart condition that came out of nowhere. He passed during a surgery that was supposed to be routine. We were young. We were scared. But we were in love. And when he died, a part of me was buried with him. Since then, it's just been me and Eli. We've been through it all together. Moving, struggling, late nights, hand-me-downs, scraped knees, laughter in small kitchens. He's my world, and I've done everything in my power to give him a life filled with love, even when my own heart felt broken beyond repair. But my family never saw it that way. They saw a girl who got pregnant too young, a girl who made a mistake, a girl who should have done better. Especially my mom, Marlene. She never forgave me for not marrying someone else after Jordan died, for not fixing the shame she thought I brought to her name. To her, being a single mother is worse than being widowed. It's weakness. It's failure. It's proof that I didn't do things the right way. Like my younger sister, Kiara. Kiara, the golden child. The one who waited. The one who got married. The one who invited me and Eli to her baby shower with a cute little invite that said, "Auntie Zara and Cousin Eli." I remember holding that invitation in my hand and feeling hopeful. Maybe this time things would be different. Maybe the past would stay in the past. Maybe we'd be treated like family. We arrived at the shower with a handmade blanket I'd stayed up 3 nights sewing and a book Eli chose himself, Love You Forever, because he said he wanted his baby cousin to know how to love their mommy. But none of that mattered once my mother opened her mouth. All it took was 2 sentences, 2 cruel, calculated lines. One from my mother, one from her sister. And in that moment, I felt smaller than I'd felt in years. But my son didn't. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He didn't hide. He stood up. He walked. He spoke. And what he gave her, what he gave all of them, was something they never expected. That day, my family tried to shame me. But Eli reminded me who I really am. And what happened next changed everything. The morning of my sister's baby shower started out like any other Saturday. I made pancakes for Eli, even though I barely slept the night before. He was buzzing with excitement, asking 100 questions about what the baby's name might be, if he'd get to hold it, and whether we could stay long enough to eat cake. I smiled through it all, nodding, laughing, trying to be present, but my stomach was twisted in knots. I didn't want to go. I hadn't wanted to RSVP in the first place. When the pastel pink and gold invitation showed up in my mailbox 3 weeks earlier, I stared at it for a long time. The envelope was addressed to Zara and Eli, handwritten in Kiara's neat cursive. It was sweet, thoughtful, maybe even genuine, but I knew better than to assume I'd be welcome just because I was invited. My relationship with my family has always been complicated. My mom, Marlene, raised us with a strict hand and a sharper tongue. Appearances mattered more than anything. Reputation, order, respectability. Kiara learned how to play that game early on. I didn't. I never could. I was the rebel, the one who challenged her rules, the one who got pregnant at 19 and shamed her in front of the church. Even after Jordan died, I was never treated with grace. There were no embraces. No casseroles dropped off. No, "How are you holding up?" Just tight-lipped condolences and sideways glances, and eventually silence. Still, I showed up because Kiara asked me to. Because Eli wanted to be there. Because part of me, maybe the most naive, hopeful part, thought that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something different. We spent the night before wrapping gifts. Eli chose a baby book from the store, Love You Forever. I had cried the first time I read that book to him when he was little. He said, "I think this baby should know how to love their mommy." I don't know how a 9-year-old can be that thoughtful, but somehow he always has been. I also spent 3 nights sewing a baby blanket. Soft fleece with little ducks on it. Neutral, sweet, warm. It wasn't fancy, but it was handmade with love. And I knew Kiara would appreciate it. She always appreciated the things I made, even if our mom never did. The shower was at a local community hall just outside the city. We pulled up in my beat-up Toyota, and Eli grabbed the gift bag with both hands, careful not to bend it. His little sneakers squeaked as he jogged to the door ahead of me. When we stepped inside, the first thing I saw was how beautiful it all looked. Gold balloons, delicate streamers, little cupcakes with pink frosting, tables lined with glittery confetti and vases filled with fresh flowers. There was even a banner that read, "Welcome, Baby Amara." I felt a lump in my throat. It was beautiful. It really was. And for a second, I let myself believe we might have a good day. Kiara greeted us with a big hug. She looked radiant. Her belly had popped, and she was glowing in a way I never was when I was pregnant. Not because I couldn't, but because I wasn't allowed to feel beautiful. My pregnancy was seen as a stain, not a celebration. I wasn't given parties or presents. I wasn't given joy, but I was happy for her. Honestly, I've never envied my sister's life. Not really. I just wished I didn't feel like a ghost in her world. We found a table near the back. Eli was immediately drawn to the snack table, especially the punch. I helped him pour a cup, and we stood together for a while, just people watching. I could feel the glances, the quick smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I was used to it. That part didn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was how Eli didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. He laughed when someone made a balloon animal. He waved at Kiara when she passed. He clutched that little gift bag in his hands like it held something sacred. And maybe it did. He had tucked something inside that I hadn't seen yet. Something he said he wanted to give to Grandma. I didn't ask what it was. I figured it was a picture he drew. Maybe a note. I didn't think twice. But I would soon learn that gift wasn't just paper and ink. It was truth. And it was about to tear through decades of shame like a match to dry grass. I remember watching my sister open her gifts one after another, glowing under the soft lighting of the room, her laughter bouncing off the walls. People clapped for tiny outfits, cooed over pacifiers shaped like animals, and marveled at diaper cakes wrapped in satin ribbon. And then it was our turn. Kiara pulled our gift bag toward her. She smiled as she pulled out the baby blanket, the one I spent 3 nights sewing with fingers that were sore and stiff by the end. She unfolded it, ran her hand over the soft fleece, and looked up at me with genuine warmth. "Zara, this is beautiful," she said. Then she reached inside and found the book Eli had picked. "Love You Forever." "Oh, this one makes me cry every time," she said, holding it up. "Thank you, Eli." People gave a light round of polite claps. One woman even muttered, "Sweet," under her breath. But the moment was short-lived, because then my mother stood up with a glass of champagne in her hand and the smile of someone who always saves her sharpest blade for dessert. She cleared her throat. "Before we move on," she said, "I just want to say how proud I am of Kiara." Her voice was syrupy and loud, her words slow and intentional. "She's doing everything right. She waited. She built a home. She married a good man, and now she's bringing a baby into a stable, 2-parent family. The way it's supposed to be." There were nods, a few cheers. Some people genuinely agreed. Others seemed unsure. I felt the first sting of shame tighten around my chest. My fingers clenched the edge of the table. Then came the knife. "At least this baby has a father," she added, looking directly at me. My heart stopped. I looked away, pretending to sip punch, pretending I didn't hear her, pretending I wasn't bleeding on the inside. But she knew I heard. Everyone did. And as if that weren't enough, my Aunt Denise let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh and added, "Unlike her sister's bastard child." The word echoed in my ears. Bastard. And it hit me like a brick to the chest. My ears rang. I felt every pair of eyes glance in my direction, then quickly look away. No one said anything. No one stood up for me. Not Kiara, not my cousin, not a single soul. And worst of all, Eli heard it. I felt his small body stiffen beside me. I turned to look at him. His eyebrows were scrunched, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say anything, but I could see the questions forming in his head. Why would Grandma say that? Why is Aunt Denise laughing? Why is everyone looking at us like that? I could barely breathe. The pressure in my chest was unbearable, and my throat felt like it was closing. I was humiliated, but more than that, I was furious. Furious at how easily they reduced my son, my bright, kind, beautiful boy, to a slur. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm out. I wanted to grab the mic and list every sacrifice I'd made to raise Eli on my own. I wanted to tell them how Jordan, his father, had died trying to survive a condition no one saw coming. I wanted them to choke on the truth. But I didn't say a word because I knew if I did, they'd spin it as another outburst. That was always how it worked in my family. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I spoke up, I was difficult. If I walked out, I was the one who ruined everything. My mother had spent years perfecting that trap, and I had spent years walking right into it, again and again, like a door I couldn't stop opening no matter how many times it hit me in the face. So I stood there, paper plate in hand, half-eaten cupcakes. The frosting was pink and cheerful, and completely at odds with the way my heart was thundering in my chest. I stood there, and I breathed. 1 breath, 2. I counted the balloons near the window. I watched a woman I didn't know refill her punch cup. I looked at the banner, "Welcome, baby Amara." And I thought about how Kiara didn't deserve to have her shower ruined by my reaction to something her own mother said. So I swallowed it. All of it. I folded it down somewhere deep in my chest, where I'd been storing things like this for years. But Eli didn't fold anything. I felt his hand brush past my hip before I even realized he was moving. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask for permission. He just moved. Quietly. Deliberately. The way he always did when he had made up his mind about something, and there was nothing left to decide. He was walking toward my mother, and he was carrying that little gift bag. My heart lurched. "Eli," I whispered. Too low for anyone else to hear." He didn't stop. He walked right up to where my mother was still standing, champagne glass held lightly between two fingers, the satisfied smile still curling at the corners of her mouth. She saw him coming, and her expression shifted, not to guilt, not to shame, but to that particular kind of indulgence adults use when a small child approaches, and they assume the child is about to say something cute. She had no idea what was coming. "Grandma," he said. His voice was steady, not shaking, not loud, just clear and calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from having nothing to say. It comes from having too much. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, began to go quiet in that rippling way. The way silence moves through a crowd when something is happening that they can feel before they understand it. "I got something for you," Eli continued. "Dad told me to give you this." My mother blinked. Her smile flickered. "Your dad?" She said it carefully, like the word itself might be a trick, because everyone in that room knew Jordan was gone. Everyone knew he had died when Eli was barely a year old. My mother especially. She had used his absence against me more times than I could count. "Yes," Eli said simply. "Dad." He held out the gift bag. My mother looked at it. Then she looked at me. I gave her nothing, no expression, no explanation, because I had no idea what was inside that bag. Truly. I had assumed it was a drawing or a note Eli had made for her. Something sweet. Something innocent. I was not prepared. My mother set her champagne glass down on the nearest table. She reached into the bag slowly, like she was expecting something fragile. And in a way, what she pulled out it was an envelope. White, slightly creased, clearly old. The kind of envelope that had been handled carefully, kept somewhere safe, taken out and put back many times. And on the front, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in 9 years. Handwriting I would have recognized in the dark. On the other side of the world, in any language, were 2 words. For Marlene. The sound that left my throat was involuntary. A sharp, broken exhale. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Because that handwriting, belonged to Jordan. I need to explain something, because I know what you're thinking. I know how this sounds. So let me take you back. Not to the shower. Not to the humiliation. Back to a hospital room, 9 years ago, when everything I thought I had was slipping through my fingers, and I was too young and too broken to stop it. Jordan was 22 when he was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's the medical term. In plain words, his heart muscle was too thick. It had been quietly thickening his whole life without any symptoms, and by the time the doctors found it, it had reached a point where surgery wasn't optional anymore. It was urgent. He went in on a Tuesday morning. He held my hand in the hallway outside the OR. Eli was 11 months old. We'd been awake the whole night before, not talking much, just close. Just breathing the same air because we both knew, the way you know things you're not ready to say out loud, that the version of us that existed in that moment might not exist on the other side of those double doors. Jordan was funny even in those last hours. He told me the nurse had the same eyebrows as my Aunt Denise, and he said it with such a straight face that I started laughing, and then I was crying, and he pulled me into his chest and held me there for a long time. He smelled like the cheap soap from the hospital bathroom, and something underneath that was just him. I pressed my face into his shoulder, and I tried to memorize it. Before they took him in, he gave a small bag to his older brother, Dante. He'd been carrying it for a few days. Inside were sealed envelopes, letters he had written in the weeks leading up to the surgery. Not because he was being dramatic, he told Dante, just because there were things he wanted people to know. Things he hadn't said out loud. Things that deserved to be said the right way, in his own words, on his own terms, without the noise of the world around him. He made Dante promise to hold them, not to open them, not to share them without Eli's involvement, not unless the moment called for it. There was a letter for Eli, meant for when he was older. There was a letter for me. There was a letter for Jordan's own mother, which Dante had delivered privately about a year after the funeral. And there was a letter for Marlene. For my mother. Dante never told me about the letter for my mother. Not because he forgot. I know that now. He held on to it because he was waiting. Because Jordan had asked him to. Jordan had told him, give it to Eli when Eli is ready to understand what it means. He'd trusted Dante to know when that moment had come. And Dante, bless his quiet, loyal heart, had trusted Eli. I found out later that Dante had given Eli the letter 3 months before the shower. He'd sat down with him on the back porch, shown him the envelope, and explained in the gentlest way possible what it was and who it was from. Eli had held it for a long time without speaking. Then he'd asked, will I know when it's time? And Dante had said, you'll know. He knew. Now here we were. My mother, standing in a room full of people who had just watched her publicly humiliate her eldest daughter and reduce her grandson to a slur, holding a letter from a dead man who had loved me enough to write it. Her hands were trembling. She didn't open it right away. She looked at the envelope, and her face had gone pale beneath her makeup. The color was draining out of her slowly, the way it does when your body registers something before your mind catches up. What is this? She asked. Her voice was quieter now. The sharpness was gone. A letter, Eli said. He wrote it a long time ago. Uncle Dante kept it for me. Dad said it was for you. My mother's jaw tightened. She looked at me. I held my hands up slightly. I don't know anything about this, and that must have landed, because her expression shifted again. She looked confused now. Genuinely, uncomfortably confused. My Aunt Denise walked over. What's happening? Marlene, what is that? A letter, my mother said again, barely above a whisper. From who? My mother didn't answer. She turned the envelope over in her hands, looked at Jordan's handwriting one more time, and then she did something I was not expecting. She opened it. Right there. In front of everyone. Maybe she thought it would be nothing. Maybe she thought it was some trick Eli had made up, or something Dante had forged, or some plot I had engineered. Maybe she thought if she read it publicly, she could control the narrative. Whatever she was thinking, she unfolded that letter and she began to read. The room was completely silent. You could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. You could hear the faint sound of a car passing outside. Every single person in that room was watching Marlene, watching her face, watching her eyes move across the page, and I watched her change. If you are listening to this right now, whether you're folding laundry, driving somewhere, lying in bed unable to sleep, I need you to understand something. Stories like Zara's, like Eli's, like Jordan's, these are not rare. There are mothers right now raising kids alone, loving them ferociously, building whole worlds for them out of nothing, and still being made to feel like failures at family gatherings. There are children right now who have more grace in their small hands than grown adults will ever hold in a lifetime. If this story is hitting something inside you, if you have ever been in that room or in that chair, or if you have ever been the person standing there with a paper plate and a broken heart, trying not to fall apart in front of people who are waiting for you to fall apart, this one is for you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers. Because if you're here, you understand what this kind of story means. And there are more of them, many more. Stories about loyalty and betrayal, about love surviving impossible things, about the moment a child says something that changes every adult in the room. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, because the next one is coming and you'll want to be here. Now, back to Marlene, back to that letter. I don't know the full contents of that letter. I want to be clear about that. I read it later, privately, when my mother showed it to me in her kitchen 2 days after the shower, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red and raw. And even now, telling this story, some of those words feel too personal to say out loud exactly. They were Jordan's words. They were sacred. But I can tell you what mattered. I can tell you the parts that unmade my mother in front of a room full of people she cared deeply about impressing. Jordan had written the letter the night before his surgery. It was 2 pages, handwritten, his penmanship a little messier than usual. He always wrote better when he wasn't nervous, and that night, he was nervous. You could see it in the letters that slanted slightly, the ink a little heavier in some places where the pen had paused. He opened by saying he didn't know if he'd be around to say this in person. He said he hoped he was wrong. He said he hoped someday Marlene would look at this envelope in Dante's hands and laugh at him for being dramatic. He wasn't wrong about writing it. He just was wrong about the timeline. Then he talked about Zara. He told my mother the truth about who I was, not who she'd decided I was, not the rebellious daughter, not the girl who got pregnant and embarrassed the family, not the shame she stored in a box and brought out at gatherings. He told her who he had seen. The girl who drove him to every doctor's appointment without complaining. The girl who read articles about his condition online at 2 a.m. and filled a notebook with questions for his cardiologist. The girl who, when the diagnosis came, didn't cry until she was in the bathroom alone because she didn't want him to feel guilty for being sick. He wrote, "She loves in a way that costs her, and instead of honoring that, you've made her feel like loving was the mistake." He wasn't angry in the letter. That's what struck me most when I read it later. Jordan had never been an angry person. He was precise, measured. He had this gift for saying devastating things in the calmest voice, and the letter was the same way. Every line landed exactly where he intended it to land. Not like an attack, but like a mirror held up close. He told my mother that if something happened to him, he needed her to be better. Not for his sake, for Eli's. He told her that Eli was going to grow up asking questions about the world, and the first answers he would receive would come from the people closest to him. He told her that if those answers were filled with shame and judgment and hierarchy, that's what Eli would learn to see when he looked at himself. He wrote, "I can't raise him anymore, but you can still choose what kind of woman he grows up calling grandmother." And then, and this is the part that broke her, he addressed what he knew. He wrote that he had seen the way she looked at Zara at family dinners. He'd seen the tightness around her mouth when my name was mentioned. He wrote that he understood she came from a world where appearances were survival, where reputation was currency, where the opinions of neighbors and church friends and distant cousins mattered enormously, and he said he didn't judge her for that. But he also said this: "A mother's cruelty is not invisible just because it smiles. Your daughter knows every version of it. So does my son. And one day, if you don't change, so will everyone else." He signed it with his full name, Jordan Anthony Webb. Not just Jordan, not just Jordan, Zara's boyfriend. His full name, like a document, like a statement, like something that was meant to stand. My mother finished reading. She stood there for a long moment, that letter held loose in her hands, and she did not move. She did not speak. She did not adjust her expression for the audience around her, which was the most telling thing of all. Marlene had spent her entire adult life managing how she appeared. She dressed for other people. She laughed for other people. Even her tears, when they came, seemed calibrated. The right amount, at the right time, for the right witnesses. But in that moment, she had nothing left to calibrate. Her sister Denise reached over and touched her arm. "Marlene, what does it say?" My mother folded the letter slowly, carefully. She tucked it back into the envelope. She pressed it flat against her palm. Then she looked at Eli. Eli was still standing there. He hadn't moved, hadn't fidgeted. He was watching his grandmother with those large, more steady eyes. Eyes that looked so much like Jordan's. It sometimes knocked the air out of my lungs when I caught them at the right angle in certain light. "Your daddy wrote this?" my mother asked. "Yes, ma'am," Eli said. "And Uncle Dante gave it to you?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded very slowly. Then she said, "Thank you for bringing it to me." And Eli, my 9-year-old brilliant heart of gold boy, said, "He said it was important that you got it. He said some things need to be said even after someone's gone." That was when my mother cried. Not a polite cry. Not the kind she performed at funerals for people she barely knew, where a single decorative tear would travel down one cheek and be carefully caught with a folded tissue. This was different. This cracked through her like something that had been sealed under pressure for a very long time and finally found an opening. She put one hand over her mouth. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair. She pressed the letter against her chest. And she wept. My Aunt Denise stared at her in open shock. Half the room had gone rigid. I saw Kiara, still seated near her gifts, watching everything unfold with wide eyes, one hand pressed to her belly. I didn't move toward my mother. I wasn't ready for that. I stood where I was, watching, feeling about 1,000 different things at once. Grief, old anger, some strange thin thread of something that might have been relief. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just relief, like watching a wound that had been infected for years finally start to drain. Denise, who had laughed the loudest, Denise, or who had said the word that had echoed in the air of this beautiful room and branded my child, turned to look at me. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, she looked uncertain. The bravado she wore like armor had a crack in it. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Zara, don't," I said, quietly. Not mean, just clear. "Not right now." She closed her mouth. I walked over to Eli. I crouched down to his level, put both hands on his small shoulders, and looked at him. He looked back at me with those calm, enormous eyes. I didn't have the words. I still don't, honestly. What do you say to a 9-year-old who just did what no adult in the room had the courage to do? I pulled him into my arms and held him tight enough that he made a small sound of protest at the pressure. "Mom," he said against my shoulder. "Too squeezy." I laughed. It came out wet and broken, but it was real. "I know, baby. I know. I'm sorry." He hugged me back anyway. The rest of the shower was changed. That's the only word for it. People began to drift into smaller conversations. Kiara eventually came over to where I was sitting with Eli and sat down across from us. She didn't say anything right away. She just handed Eli another cupcake, which he accepted without ceremony. Then she looked at me. "I should have said something," she said. "When Mom, I should have said something." I looked at my younger sister. She looked genuinely ashamed. Not performing it, genuinely living inside it. And I thought about all the years between us, all the ways we'd navigated the same household and come out so differently. All the times I'd looked at her and felt a complicated knot of love and resentment that I never fully unraveled. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." She nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. Just accepted it. "I'm sorry," she said. "It wasn't enough. But it was a start. And sometimes a start is the most important thing." My mother left the shower early. Before the cake was cut. Before the last gifts were opened. Before the photographs were taken. She collected her wrap from the coat rack near the door. She pressed a kiss to Kiara's forehead. She patted Eli's head once without speaking, and she left. I watched her walk out through the glass doors, and I let her go. I didn't follow. I didn't call after her. I just watched those glass doors swing shut behind her, and I breathed. She called me 2 days later. She asked if she could come over. I thought about it for a full day before I said yes. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon. She wore no makeup, which I had never once seen in my adult life. She looked older without it. She sat down at my kitchen table, and I made coffee because I needed something to do with my hands. And for a long moment we just sat across from each other in the particular silence of two people who have a great deal to say, and no good roadmap to say it. Then she reached into her bag and set the letter on the table between us. "I've read it 8 times, she said. I didn't respond. I didn't know he had written these. I didn't know Dante was keeping them. She ran one finger along the edge of the envelope. "He was a good man, your Jordan." "He was," I said. "I never told you that." She paused. I never told him either." I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug. "No, you didn't." She looked at me then. Fully. The kind of direct eye contact she usually used as a weapon. Steady, assessing. But there was none of that edge to it now. There was something else instead. Something that looked, under all that pride and performance, like exhaustion. "My mother was like me," she said. "Hard. Reputation first. I thought that's what love looked like. I thought if you pushed your children hard enough, if you held a high enough standard, they'd thank you later." "Some things need more than standards, Mom," I said. "Some things need grace." She was quiet. "Eli never had a father at Christmas," I continued. "He never had a father at school pickup. He has never had someone to call Dad when the other kids are calling theirs. And instead of that being a thing that deserved compassion, you made it a thing that deserved shame." I felt my voice trying to crack, and I held it steady. "He is 9 years old, and he has more dignity than every adult in that room put together." My mother looked down at her hands. "I know," she said. And then, barely above a whisper, "He looks like him, you know. Like Jordan." "I know. Every time I see it, I think—" She stopped. Started again. "I think about all the things I said to you when you were pregnant. All the things I said after he died. All the ways I chose what other people thought over what you needed. And I—" Her voice broke. "For real this time? I don't know how to undo that, Zara. I don't know how to go back." I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "You start from here. I want to tell you something about raising Eli alone. It was not tragic. I want to be clear about that, because stories like mine are sometimes told as if the absence of a partner automatically makes a life lesser. As if a single parent and a child in a small apartment is something to be pitied rather than witnessed. I don't want pity. I never wanted that. What I want is for people to understand what it actually looks like. It looks like turning the heat down at night so the electric bill stays manageable, and piling an extra blanket on Eli's bed and one on mine, and not thinking much about it after a while. It looks like packing lunches the night before because mornings are short and precious, and better spent watching him eat cereal and tell me about whatever he dreamed about. It looks like taking the long bus route because it's cheaper than parking, and turning those long rides into a game. Let's guess where that man is going. Let's make up a story about those 2 women laughing. Let's count how many red doors we pass. It looks like crying in the car after a particularly hard week, because that's the one place I had privacy. It looks like checking on him 6 times a night when he had a fever, and then somehow making it to work on 4 hours of sleep and telling myself I was fine. It looks like birthday parties made from whatever I had. Streamers from the dollar store, a cake I baked from a box mix at midnight, a living room turned into whatever he'd asked for that year. A fort, a spaceship, once an elaborate detective headquarters complete with a magnifying glass I wrapped in gold paper. It looks like that. And also like this. A boy who grew up knowing he was chosen. Who knew, not because I told him in words every single day, although I did, but because he felt it in everything around him, in the way I showed up, in the way we figured things out together, in the way, when he was sad, I sat with him in the sad instead of rushing him out of it. Jordan loved him for 11 months. 11 months of bedtime, of first words forming and first steps wobbling, of tiny fists grabbing at his face. 11 months of deciding, with every moment, what kind of father he was going to be. And then he wrote those letters. He wrote them because he knew that love doesn't stop being useful, just because the person who felt it is no longer in the room. He was right about that. I asked Eli about it the night of the shower. We were home by 7. I'd made grilled cheese and tomato soup because it was his comfort food, and because I needed the ritual of making something warm with my hands. We sat at the small table by the window, and for a while we just ate. I let him lead. I always let him lead. After a while, he said, "Was Grandma sad?" "Yes," I said. "I think she was." He considered this for a moment. "Is that okay? That I made her sad?" I thought carefully before answering. "You didn't make her sad, sweetheart. The letter made her think. And thinking sometimes leads to sad, and sometimes sad leads to better. Does that make sense?" He nodded slowly, swirling his spoon in the soup. Uncle Dante said Dad wrote it because he wanted to say things that were true. He said the truth is a gift even when it doesn't feel like one. I smiled despite myself. Where Dante's pretty smart. He said Dad was smart too. He said Dad used to say that the people who matter most deserve honesty even when honesty is hard. Eli looked up at me. "Did Dad know Grandma was mean to you?" "He saw some things," I said carefully. "He worried about us. Both of us. That's why he wrote the letter." Eli was quiet again. Then, "I was scared to give it to her." "You were?" "Yeah." He shrugged, small shoulders lifting. "I didn't know what she'd do, but I thought, if Dad went through all that trouble to write it, and Uncle Dante kept it all those years, then it was important, and she needed it more than I needed to be comfortable." I stared at him for a moment. My 9-year-old son, in his dinosaur sweatshirt, covered in tomato soup. I had just summarized one of the most emotionally mature decisions I had ever watched a person make. "Where did you come from?" I whispered. "You and Dad." And there it was. Right there. That was everything. My Aunt Denise called me a week after the shower. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, she was quiet for a long moment on the other end. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." "Yes," I said. "You do." "What I said about Eli?" She stopped, started again. "There's no excuse for it. I knew what I was doing when I said it. I said it to be cruel." I appreciated that she didn't try to pretend otherwise. I had braced myself for the kind of non-apology that starts with, "I'm sorry you were hurt," or "I didn't mean it that way." The kind that puts the wound on the wounded person and leaves the person who caused it clean. But she didn't do that. "I was jealous of you," she said eventually. "For years. You think I looked at you like a failure? I looked at you like someone who had the courage to live through something that would have flattened me. You lost him. You raised that boy alone. You showed up to that party with a handmade blanket because you cared, Zara. I walked in with a $60 gift card I bought on my way over and didn't think twice about it." I didn't say anything. "I disguised it," she continued. "I made myself believe I was being honest, that I was holding a standard. But I was just jealous of you. And I took it out on your son. And that is something I'm going to have to live with." "Yes," I said again. "You will." We talked for a while longer. I didn't forgive her in that call. I didn't tell her everything was fine, because it wasn't. But I opened a door, just a crack. Because I have learned, slowly, painfully, over 9 years of carrying things I didn't choose, that forgiving someone is not something you do for them. You do it for the version of yourself that deserves to put it down. There is one more letter I haven't mentioned. Jordan wrote one for me too. I read it the night he died, because Dante brought it to the hospital when there was nothing else left to bring. I was sitting in a waiting room chair with Eli asleep in a car seat beside me. Eli, who was too small to understand, too small to lose anything yet, too small to know that the whole shape of his life was rearranging itself in a room down the hall where I was not allowed to be. Dante sat beside me and said, "He wanted you to have this." I didn't read it that night. I tucked it into my bag, and I held Eli's car seat handle with both hands, and I made it through the next few hours on sheer muscle memory and shock. I read it 3 days later, in the silence of our apartment at 2 a.m, after Eli was asleep. I've read it many times since. I won't share all of it. Some things belong to the people they were written for. But Jordan wrote one line that I have carried with me every single day for 9 years. I've thought of it in the hard moments. I've thought of it in the waiting room chairs, and the parking garage cries, and the birthday parties pulled together from nothing, and the mornings when I was so tired I couldn't see clearly, and I still made pancakes because Eli was buzzing with excitement in the kitchen. Or he wrote, "You were never someone who needed fixing or improving or choosing differently. You were always exactly enough. I just hope one day you believe it the way I do." 9 years later, a baby shower, a paper plate with half-eaten cupcakes, a room full of people waiting for me to shrink, and my son, walking forward with a letter in his hand. Maybe, I'm starting to believe it. I've been asked by people who know this story in real life, was it worth it? Going to that shower? Putting yourself in that room? I've thought about it. Here's what I know. If I hadn't gone, Marlene never would have received that letter. Not from my hands. I never would have delivered it. And Eli never would have had the chance to be who he was in that moment, in front of people who needed to see it. Sometimes the places that hurt us the most are the exact places where something important needs to happen. Not always. Sometimes you genuinely just need to stay home. But sometimes the difficult room is where the truth finally catches up to the people it's been chasing. I also know this. Children absorb everything. Everything. They watch how we handle humiliation. They watch whether we stand up or fold. They watch whether we treat ourselves like we matter. Eli had watched me fold for years in front of that family. He had watched me shrink and go quiet and swallow things that should have been said. And somehow, despite all that, or maybe because of it, he learned that some things are too important to swallow. He learned it from Jordan, yes. From the spirit of a man he barely had the chance to know in person, but knew completely through every story I told, every photograph on the wall, every trait he discovered in himself that I'd say, "You got that from your dad." But he also learned it by watching me survive. I don't always feel like a good mother. I don't always feel like I'm enough. There are nights when the bills are piling and the exhaustion is total, and I look in the bathroom mirror and I think, maybe my mother was right, that maybe I made a mess of things, that maybe I should have done it differently. And then Eli comes in to ask if we can stay up late to watch a nature documentary about octopuses, and he stands beside me at the bathroom sink and looks at us both in the mirror with those Jordan eyes, and he says something like, "Mom, what do you know octopuses have 3 hearts?" And I think, 2 of them are mine. And I think, this is the thing I built. This boy. This life. This love. And I think, Jordan, can you see this? Can you see him? I think he can. Marlene and I, we are not where we used to be. We are not where I hope we will eventually get to. But we are somewhere new. She calls now. She shows up. She brought Eli a book about space last month without any occasion at all, just because she saw it and thought of him. He was over the moon about it. She has not become a different person overnight. Old habits are stubborn, and my mother is a woman built from decades of them. But she is trying. And I have decided, for now, that trying is worth something. Denise sent Eli a birthday card this year. Inside she wrote, "You are one of the finest young people I know. Your dad would be so proud." I let Eli decide how he felt about that. He read it twice. He put it on his nightstand. That's his call to make. As for me, I have a 9-year-old who told his grandmother that some things need to be said even after someone's gone. I have a letter from a man I loved that tells me I was always enough. I have a small apartment with a view of a parking lot and a kitchen where I make pancakes on Saturday mornings. I have everything. Not everything I wanted. Not everything I expected. But everything that matters. And if you are listening to this right now, wherever you are, whatever table you're sitting at, whatever room you've been made to feel small in, I want you to hear this the way Eli would say it. Steady and clear, with no drama and no apology. You don't have to shrink for people who need you small. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that disappears. And sometimes the most powerful thing in a room full of cruelty is one small person who walks forward, holds something out and says, "My dad told me to give you this." The truth was the gift. It always is. If this story moved you, if you felt it somewhere real, share it. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me about the moment someone stood up for you, or the moment you finally stood up for yourself. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be heard. Not just Zara's, yours too. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.